Chapter 4 Tales of Treasure. "Hey, Jimmy," called Bert Bobbsey as he ran along beside his Indian chum. "What's the matter?" came the answer. "If we don't find that cabin of yours pretty soon, we'll be so soaked there won't be any need of going in," stated Bert. "It isn't very far off now, is it, Jimmy?" asked his sister, giving her head a shake to rid her black hair of some of the raindrops. Sunshine did not wear a hat winter or summer, nor did her brother. Though Nan and Bert went bareheaded during warm weather, they were not quite rugged enough to go without some covering in the cold weather. But none of the children now had on hats. "No, the cabin is just beyond that clump of trees," Jimmy said, and Nan could not help feeling glad. For, though she did not mind an ordinary rain, this was a very hard storm. A moment or two later, the little party of berry pickers reached an old log cabin which Bert did not remember to have seen before. "Why, I didn't know this was here," he said in surprise. "It's been here quite a while, I guess," said Jimmy. "It's almost falling apart, but I think we can find part of the roof under which we can sit and keep out of the rain until it stops." "This sure is funny," went on Bert, as the Indian lad pushed open the door, which hung by only one hinge, and went inside. "I never knew this was here." "You didn't know about the huckleberries either, until Jimmy told us," said Nan, with a laugh, as she shook some of the water out of her eyes and set her pail down on a box in the cabin. "Oh, I'm soaked!" she exclaimed. "I'll build a fire and we can dry out," offered Jimmy, pointing to an open hearth in one of the two rooms of the cabin. "There's a lot of wood here, and the roof doesn't leak as badly as I thought." "Whose cabin is it?" asked Bert, as he looked about inside. It was a welcome shelter from the storm. "Don't know," answered the Indian boy. He was busy gathering pieces of broken boxes and other wood to make a fire. "I found it soon after we moved here with my aunt. Sunshine and I often used to come here to have picnics." "That was before you were so kind to us and made friends for us," said Sunshine, with a grateful look at Nan. "It's a dandy place," said Bert. "We fellows could get up a club and camp out here after we fix the place up a bit." "It's pretty far from home," said Nan. "Besides, maybe whoever owns it wouldn't let you play in it." "That's so," agreed Bert. "Well, anyhow, I'd like to know who used to live here." Jimmy could tell nothing about this, not having lived around Lakeport as long as had Bert and Nan Bobbsey. But the Indian boy said he thought probably the old log cabin had been put up long ago by lumbermen who were cutting down the trees nearby. Later, Bert found this to be true, but for a time there was quite a mystery about the place. The rain still came down hard, and the wind blew with a whistling sound around the old shack. But it was a good shelter from the storm. Though the roof leaked in many places, there was a space in front of the hearth where it was dry, and the children were soon seated on boxes in front of the blaze Jimmy had made, drying themselves and feeling rather jolly over their adventure. The boys took off their coats and hung them near the fire to dry, while Nan and Sunshine spread out their skirts over their knees and sat as near the fire as they dared, to dry their garments. "If we only had something to eat now," said Bert, "this would be a regular picnic." "What's the matter with eating some of the berries?" asked Nan. "I thought we were going to save them for Dinah to make pies," Bert stated. "We can get plenty more berries after the storm," said Jimmy. "I'm going to eat some of mine." Each pail was about half full, and as the Bobbsey twins and the two Indians began eating the berries, Nan said, "I believe others must have been in here having picnic lunches. Look, there are parts of cracker boxes scattered about." "I don't care much about cracker boxes," chuckled Bert. "What I'd like would be some crackers." Jimmy suddenly got up off the box on which he was sitting near the crackling fire and began walking about the cabin. "What's the matter?" asked Bert. "Oh, nothing," answered the Indian boy. He went into the other room and a moment later came back with an unopened box of crackers which he tossed to Bert. "Hey, where'd you get it?" asked Nan's brother in surprise. "Found it back there," and Jimmy nodded toward the next room. Other picnic parties have been here, sure enough. I got to thinking that they often forget and leave things behind. So I scouted around and I found this box of crackers. Fine! Exclaimed Bert. Because of the waxed paper on the crackers, they were fresh and crisp in spite of the length of time they might have been in the cabin. So, munching the crackers and eating huckleberries, the 4 children had a good time in the old log cabin. They were getting dry, and the fire made a grateful warmth, for though it was summer, the storm had chilled the air. "Listen to it pour!" exclaimed Nan, as the rain pelted down on the roof. "I wonder if we'll ever get home." "Oh, sure," said Jimmy. "The storm can't last much longer. It's too fierce," was the opinion of Sunshine. "Fierce storms are always quickly over." When the boys had eaten and were fairly dry, they went roaming about the cabin, leaving the girls sitting near the fire. "I wonder if there's anything else hidden here," said Bert. "What do you mean, hidden?" asked Jimmy Big Fish. "Treasure, maybe," suggested Bert, hardly knowing why he used that word. "This looks like the kind of log cabin the early settlers would live in, when there were wild Indians," said Bert quickly, lest Jimmy and Sunshine might feel hurt. "Yes, this is the same kind of log cabin the old Indians used to gather around to fight when white people were inside," Jimmy admitted. "I've often heard my father, Chief Big Fish, tell stories about Indian fights. He wasn't in any fights himself, because fighting between the whites and Indians was over before my father grew up. But he had heard lots of stories that he told me." "Did his people fight the white people?" asked Nan. "Yes," said Jimmy, "they did. But you have to remember," he was quick to add, "that in the old days many white people were very cruel and wanted to take the Indians' land. So what else could my father's people do but fight?" "Yes, I guess they had to," admitted Bert. "Some white people were just as bad as the Indians. Did your father ever find any treasure, Jimmy?" "What kind of treasure?" "I mean when the white people would run away if they heard the Indians were after them and might leave gold and silver and jewelry hidden in their cabins?" "I guess at that time there wasn't a great amount of that sort of treasure," Jimmy answered. "But my father often told me stories about some of his people finding gold." "He did?" exclaimed Nan, as eager and excited at this as was her brother. "Tell us about it, Jimmy." Jimmy and Bert came back and sat down in front of the fire, and then the Indian boy told the Bobbsey twins several stories about buried treasure, as he had heard them from his father, Chief Big Fish. "Once," began the Indian lad, "my father's grandfather was on the warpath with some of his braves. There was a white settlement near the Indian village, and the whites had been unfair to the Indians, killing some of the warriors and taking their land. So my father's grandfather, that would be my great-grandfather, started out on the warpath. But the whites heard they were coming and skipped out." "I guess I'd do the same," admitted Nan, with a little shiver. "But what about the treasure?" asked Bert, who was thinking more about that than about anything else. "Well, the white folks, whoever they were, left most of their money and valuables buried around their cabins," Jimmy explained. "But my great-grandfather and his warriors were smart. They knew where to look for such things. I suppose the white folks, in their hurry, left plenty of signs to show where they had hidden the stuff. They didn't mean to, of course, but the Indians were smarter about such things than the settlers were. So my great-grandfather dug up a lot of treasure." "Did he keep it?" asked Nan. "Sure, why not?" Jimmy wanted to know. "The white folks took the Indians' land, and the Indians took the white folks' treasure to pay for it." "I guess that was only fair," agreed Bert. "Did you hear any more about treasure?" asked Nan. "Sure, lots," Jimmy replied. Then he told another story about some relative of his great-grandfather's who, out in the far west where gold was discovered, came upon a lonely cabin where there had been a fight between a band of Indians and some whites. Many were killed, and the Indian party seemed to have been driven off. But though some of the whites lived for a time, they too died, and in searching the cabin the second party of Indians found much gold. I wonder if there's any gold hidden around here, Nan said hopefully, glancing about the cabin. Don't believe so, Jimmy answered. There weren't many Indian fights in this part of the country. Still, there must have been some, insisted Bert. And don't you think, Jimmy, that lots of times the whites might have buried treasure the Indians didn't find? Oh, sure, plenty of it. And maybe the whites couldn't come back to get the treasure they buried, went on Bert. Yes, that might have happened, admitted the Indian boy. Then, decided Bert, it might be that there's treasure buried around Lakeport. I'm going to have a look someday. Wouldn't it be great if we found a lot of treasure? Exclaimed Nan. Wonderful, agreed Sunshine. Well, I'm going to have a look, said Bert again. He got up off his box as though he might be going to begin the treasure hunt at once. But what he was going to do was go to the door to see if it had stopped raining. However, before he had crossed the room, there was a sudden noise outside, and Nan exclaimed, "Hark! What was that?" End of chapter 4.